Welcome into it. Sunday Live is here with the Average Joe Sports Show. That's Gary Sharp, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt, and many of you are piling in to the stream. We invite you to check us out on the Average Joe Sports Show YouTube. Like and subscribe. Tell a buddy. We aren't going to give you anything. We wish we could, but bribery's not in the cards, at least today. You can find us on Spotify and iTunes and follow along with the Average Joe Sports Show on Twitter, the AJ Sports Pod. We'll do our shout outs coming up. Fellas, pretty newsworthy week. I know we did a midweek show and reflected and reacted to John Cook, Nebraska basketball. But we got to hear, Sharpie, from Coach Rhule yesterday, kind of the winter edition press conference, spring game changes, some injury news, special teams update, and just an overall reflection on the roster.
Wait a minute. That's where we're starting? Shams had the biggest scoop next to the reporter that broke that President Trump had COVID. And we're going to start with Matt Rhule. I'm kidding, Schmitty. I'm kidding.
Yes.
But this is how, don't you guys think this is how crazy this week is? Nebraska alters their spring game, and it's not even the top story in the state. Damn, no. John Cook stealing headlines.
Or thank you, John Cook. Well, thank you for many reasons, but yeah. The temperature of the spring game, I mean, it was laid out, Bill, incredibly well by Matt Rhule as far as the reasoning. It'll be non-traditional here coming up here in April for Nebraska 2025. But, brother, I don't know. They can put an offensive line out there based on some of the injuries.
Well, people are saying, well, just don't televise the game then. Other teams could just send in their own Connor Stallions to do their scouting like it's the Senior Bowl and come in, and Nebraska would say, do we want the opposing team scouts to come in, or do we want them to pay, $20 for a beer and put it in our NIL fund? Let's just scrap the whole thing altogether. So, look, the spring game, as nice as it has been, and I like spending a Saturday afternoon at Memorial Stadium with 70,000 people watching a glorified practice. But it's kind of become a thing of the past when Scott Frost went to that modified Stableford scoring system or whatever it was, when nobody knew how the points were scored. And it was kind of a joke and all of that. And it reached its high point with the Jack Hoffman run. And I think at that moment, maybe spring games have kind of served their purpose. But I get what he's doing. Look, NFL teams have open practices and they have open scrimmages. But as you're moving into this NIL or transfer portal era, you got to be careful. And that's why I say Matt Rhule is going to be, if he stays at Nebraska, his next contract will be as Nebraska's CEO/head football coach. He's running a corporation right now, and he's trying to save, his business for the most part.
The one thing with this spring game that I think you're going to miss, and I agree with you, Bill, it's not what it used to be. I mean, when was the last time we had 1s v1s in the spring game? I mean, if it's not 1s v1s and 2s v2s and all that because you're trying to hide a few things, and it's not a game anymore. And that's beside the point. It is bad, I think, for, as we've talked about before on both this show and on a Saturday morning version of my previous show,
well played.
Yeah, you just navigated that really well. Nicely done.
You just graduated in post-grad work there.
Thank you. There's a lot of kids in this state and a lot of families in this state that can't make it to games in the fall, that can make it to spring games. You gotta have something, because I think for a lot of us, the spring game was the first Husker game you ever got to go and attend. That's how it was for me as a kid. You know what? Dad didn't want to pay $50 a seat for me as a little 6-year-old. So we're getting into the spring game and I'm going to do the drug-free pledge for my seat. And guess what? We're in for free. There is an important aspect, I think, especially with as disconnected as some of the youth are in the state with the Husker football team. You got to find something to be able to connect with them in the springtime. But I agree. It hasn't been a spring game for a while now. And right now, I know it's not the top concern in the state. Go win some games in the fall and everyone will forgive you for not having a spring game.
Yeah, I think Rhule laid out his reasoning, and they're not canceling the spring game; they're altering the spring game. I think that's an important part of this. We all kind of could see this coming. One thing I didn't like about what Rhule said yesterday, and I'll be curious if any other schools follow suit. I think we were kind of headed down the path of spring games were going to look different, but I wouldn't, I don't think Nebraska is going to be an outlier. If somebody has a good spring game and they depart, and they didn't, did you even want them at Nebraska? He's like, well, I don't want speed, basically he doesn't want people to see players and tampering. Well, I have a problem with that. I don't understand that reasoning. So if they don't want to be at Nebraska, spring game isn't going to change things that much.
Mm-hmm.
And so that one I disagreed with, but I'll be curious to see if other schools follow suit because, Rhule was, I don't know if he's passionate. He was just honest about how it affects Nebraska. And it may be on a school by school basis, but it's kind of, around the country, there are probably, 8 to 10 schools that put a lot of people in the stands and maybe make some money. Nebraska makes $1 million off the spring game.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll find something that works for the fans. And I think it'll be very similar to that 1890 practice that they had last August. That was pretty popular. Raise a little money, give people a little taste, but don't give them too much. And also get, the objective in spring with most coaches nowadays with a shortened roster is to get in and get out. Don't get anybody injured, and you're more willing to have guys get off-season surgery and say, hey, don't worry about coming back for spring. You got the whole summer to get ready for camp. That's the most important one is August 1, not March 1.
And, Nebraska's probably going to be going to Division II school spring games or 1AA or whatever it is anymore. Nebraska's going to go scout them. They just don't want anybody coming in and scouting their games. So they'll probably do that. I hope they don't go to that, let's have an all-star skills competition and, the superstars where they're doing the obstacle course at the end of the day. I remember, Gary, you probably remember this too. Remember Robert Edwards, great running back out of Georgia, went to the New England Patriots, and he gets named to the Pro Bowl after his rookie season. One of the promising running backs of the NFL shreds his knee in a meaningless flag football game on the beach in Maui or wherever they were playing at. And it's like, I got Demetrius Bell getting hurt in live game action. They missed him all last year. Bly Hill got hurt. That, may put a wrench into what they wanted to do in the secondary and at the receiver room. But, just don't. If you're going to do something worthwhile and don't make it some gimmicky thing. They've already got Fan Day coming up in August, but I agree with everybody else saying, hey, what about the money? Yeah, I'm sure they've got some ideas, to come up with a way to make some cash in late April.
Can I say, I know Matt Rhule didn't make an emphasis of this. I don't think injuries should be that big of a concern from the spring game. Like, you're going to scrimmage in the spring anyway. Football is inherently a dangerous sport. Like, I don't think they're going to sit there and go, well, we're not doing the spring game, which means we're just going to have one fewer scrimmage this spring. Like, they're definitely going to do something internal. That's why I think Matt Rhule leaned into this, we don't want players tampering with us. And I'm also with Gary that if that is your largest concern, maybe you don't have the right players, but also the reality of college football is that 90% of guys are soldiers of fortunes anymore. It's as simple as that. And if somebody wants to come in and offer a lot of money, you can't blame the kid for saying, I was all in on Nebraska until Ole Miss offered me $2 million a year based on what I put together in the spring game. Like, I get that. It's just, it's the changing world of college football. Coaches are paranoid about everything, and there's multiple reasons to be paranoid about a spring game. So sell it to the fans, win some games in the fall, and everyone will move on.
The only way this changes is if they drop the spring portal period.
And I
think where then you don't have to worry about a guy performing well in your spring game and all of a sudden being a free agent.
You still have the spring portal. The proposal is to just have that 15-day window in January. That's what the coaches came forward with, and they want to adopt it where it's just one portal window. But I would err on the side of eliminate the headaches, eliminate one more spurt of having to re-recruit your kids. Now, you're always kind of doing that, but if somebody flashes on film and draws more eyeballs and phone calls and text messages and one less practice to injure, but Rhule and crew are going to prep how they prep, and it's going to be physical, right? They're going to get them ready, and you have to be a team that hits and tackles and does all those things, but you're going to have to figure it out a little bit differently with a shrunken roster. Beforehand, you had a whole army of guys on the scout team to go do it. Now you've got your first 57, your next 53, and you're going to have to go gladiator mode a little bit differently because you don't have the numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it's and the thing about it is this is a fascinating spring. Like, this is a monster spring for Nebraska. Guys that are returning that need to make a jump, and they got some great competition. Defensive back, wide receiver, the interior offensive line. I mean, this is like a really, really good spring for competition. And, you know, it's like Survivor Island. They're going to be over 105 when they begin spring football. And so there's going to be some guys that realize their path to playing time is blocked. And guys, they might be guys that just showed up here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't think they made, promises to guys that they got out of the portal like, hey, come here and you know what, you're going to be fine. I mean, there may be some guys that get here and go, damn, I thought I had a chance to play. I'm looking around. I'm being beat out by guys that were here. I might go look somewhere else. So it is a big, big spring for Nebraska because it's a full spring of Dana Holgorsen. It's a full spring of John Butler. And it's a full another spring of Dylan Raiola. But there's also, guys, don't overlook this. I just, we've talked a lot about wide receivers and defensive backs and the amount of numbers they have there and the competition. And, there's a lot of spots open. I will tell you one of the spots that'll be fascinating to me is what happens at backup quarterback, because they're all in on Harburg going to tight end. So he's not going to bounce back and forth. But what if you go through spring and you don't like your options behind Raiola? And yet you got Harburg out there who's catching passes, and you're thinking, oh, God, we can't do this to him. So I think that battle for who's going to back up Dylan is going to be one of the more intriguing battles as well. Will it be a guy that redshirted last year at Purdue? Will it be a true freshman that just walked on campus?
Well, and Gary, battle is going to be the word of the spring for me because it's everywhere. Like, when you got 20 guys on roster that aren't going to be here by the start of fall camp, I mean, everyone's going to have to compete every single day. And if the potential for your ass to get shipped off because you're not a part of the 105 isn't enough to instill a winning mindset in you, I don't know what it is. You talked about it like a month and a half ago, Gary, that cut down to 105 might be good for Rhule. That's one of the things I'm seeing here is like, man, guys are going to have to battle for the next 9 months just to earn a spot into fall camp.
Absolutely.
Did you catch when he said too, speaking of quarterbacks, is that, with this, we'll apply the principles of the NFL and have our top 57. And instead of carrying 2 quarterbacks, we'll have 3. Mm-hmm. I mean, didn't Nebraska have like 8 with, I'm sure Luke Longvall's back for yet another year, but Nebraska's quarterback room might just be 3 or 4 once TJ Lateef, walks on campus. They love Gramstead. And you've got Davila coming in for Purdue. That was your transfer portal quarterback. So instead of having 8 or 9, yeah, you might want to have Heinrich say, we are all, tell him we're all in on you being in tight end, but make sure you keep this book at the top of your desk as well, just in case.
Hey, I am so excited about the quarterback room because I'm telling you, I'm all in on TJ Lateef. Raiola finally believes that he has real competition. Mm-hmm. I've said this numerous times. I don't think Raiola thought he had competition last year. Never that Harburg was a threat. You know what?
Let me ask you this.
Maybe not a full threat is a freshman or a transfer, but Dylan has internal competition to get better. But I think there's competition in that room. I really think that quarterback room is going to make a jump because it's not just Glenn Thomas that's overseeing it. It's Dana Holgorsen that's overseeing it. And keep in mind this, another part of this is the transfer from Purdue. Holgorsen probably is about as familiar with as he was with Raiola when he came to Lincoln. So that's a room to watch. The number one guy is not being dislodged. I'm not saying that, but they're going to have more real competition for spots in that room than I think we've had at Nebraska at quarterback in a while.
Here's my question to you. Has he ever had competition? Because every place that Dylan has gone, he's pretty much been the guy, because he played at 5 different high schools in 4 years, 2 in Arizona, and left before his senior year to go play at Buford. And everywhere it's been like, hey, Dylan Raiola is coming, so that's going to be our starting quarterback. We're going to go to Chandler. He's going to be the starting quarterback. He's going to go to Buford. He's going to be the starting quarterback. He comes to Nebraska, right? Has he ever after junior high? And I'm guessing in junior high, there wasn't much competition. Mm-hmm. So has he ever had competition for his job? And you're right. This might be a year where there might be a little bit of pressure. I think the pressure comes from that subtle comment that Rhule had yesterday. You see, get his weight down. And I really like what, he's good. Right. Did you hear? I mean, that was the one, like, I heard you. And I think we would all agree that he probably needs to, get in a little bit more better shape to be able to run than he did last year.
I know this is, okay. So the Dylan's out there. Okay. He's everywhere. He knows what his role is. And this, we talk about daily about the quarterback in Nebraska. Why is he wearing a Tominaga medium over a turtleneck? And, it doesn't make him look good. Does he always wear a flak jacket?
Wow.
Do we know, like, what if that's just his body?
Could be.
Like, what if that's what he's always going to look like?
Some of us spend
that doesn't mean he can't get faster, but
some of us spend time in the gym and it does not matter.
But he did slip that in. Get his weight down, and then we
But I think subtly, Bill, it shows you that Nebraska has somebody. I mean, look at around the Big Ten this year. There's going to be a ton of schools again that either have a first-year starter or a transfer. Nebraska needs to take advantage of having the institutional knowledge of a guy returning that has as much upside as Dylan does. Mm-hmm. And they need to use that. And then Dylan needs to, use the jump into year number 2. But we haven't had a quarterback that we followed at Nebraska. Now, like, most recent was Martinez a little bit, but Dylan is everywhere. Dylan's not afraid to put himself out there. Dylan is the discussion of everything, but Rhule knows that is the key to their season. If Raiola makes the jump, because look what they've built around him, what they've given him options, they went out and got an OC for him. Okay. The OC wouldn't commit to Nebraska full-time until the quarterback committed to Nebraska full-time. So they know what they have, but that person that they're relying on that wears 15 needs to take it to the next level. And he likes to be coached hard, and I think they're going to coach him hard. But I've said this, and this was probably back in December. He is not off limits to criticism, guys. Okay, because that's how important he is to the success of Nebraska in 2025.
Well, when you're talking about a sophomore at any position, there's the two ways it can go. It's a sophomore slump or a sophomore jump.
Yeah. But can there be a slump? Because he was good. We know what the limitations were in his freshman year. Will we see a completely different Dylan? Like a completely different Dylan with a whole year of Holgorsen. I mean, that makes him a quarterback, not, makes all the parts of Holgorsen that's gotten 6 guys to the NFL is Dylan the 7th. And you start to look at him and go, okay, he fixed his footwork. He fixed his speed. He fixed the clock's ticking in his head when the pocket breaks down. He fixed his touch on a deep ball, that kind of stuff. That's what I'm looking forward to. That's why you kind of like to see spring a little bit, to see when those situations, when they go live, if Dylan has improved those kind of things.
Well, the thing that I think back to is that first spring game with the deep ball, right? I mean, he hit Lloyd on a deep shot, and you fast forward to the season, and after the first 3 games, that downfield accuracy, and that's the toughest ball to complete. So it's not ideal, but the good ones can become great at it, and it's a whole difference maker for your offense. No, the things you guys have laid out with what's
put a shirt on.
Does Carson alive?
Has he done the laundry since last week, or is that the same?
No, those are still my clothes hanging up. And before I go golfing today, I need to hang them up or I'm grounded before I get beat. Yeah, Mom's out in the car waiting. What time did you get home last night? 1? House party?
Wow.
Said no comment.
Attaboy.
Look at all the Lincoln Southwest
Pedialyte and a non-filter. I mean, he's ready for Sunday.
but so one quick thing here. Did it surprise you guys? Because it was 30 minutes yesterday before Raiola's name came up.
Yeah,
that kind of shows you where we are in the state of college football and Nebraska's program. Like, there's a lot of stuff that was discussed that wasn't about individual players.
And that surprised me, But are we surprised that there was minimal mention of what's coming next on the special teams, just in terms of like a name? Like I was thinking, okay, you finally got the press conference around. Maybe we'll finally get a special teams coordinator name. Maybe we get the Friday evening news dump from Pete Thamel on Twitter, and here's the name, and Matt Rhule's going to talk about it on Saturday. Still nothing there.
Well, for him to say, well, it's a non-recruiting position.
Yeah.
That eliminates a couple of dudes that we were thinking about, because they're really excellent recruiters. And maybe
does that mean it's not a full-time job?
That's what I wondered. Where's the that seemed less of a priority. Like, we'll have somebody here who's working with them and making sure that
it wasn't a schematic thing. It's, what do you say, fundamentals and technique. So he was putting it on guys, the way I read it, not doing their freaking job.
Here's a thought I had. Okay, follow along with me here, if you don't mind. You talk about it not being a full-time position, potentially, not having the recruiting side of things. You know who did a pretty good job with the in-state recruiting and being a liaison to the high school coaches around the state? Ed Foley.
Mm-hmm.
My thought is, do you quietly bring him back to keep on doing what he was doing on the recruiting side of things and just let your special teams coordinator only coach special teams? I wonder if Matt Rhule is kind of circling that as, you know what, maybe Ed Foley was overextended doing everything with the high schools and trying to coach special teams. Let's have Ed continue doing what he was doing as a recruiting guy around the state. And now we'll just bring in a coach that can just focus on the football, and whether he's full-time or not, who knows? But that was kind of where my mind went with that, because you have a lot of high school coaches around the state that appreciated Ed Foley and him getting out to the little corners of the state, his summer road trip through Nebraska, if you will. Like, high school coaches resonated well with him. The results in the field weren't there, but I do wonder if they quietly bring him back and just have him behind the scenes continue recruiting. And hey, the fans don't know, doesn't hurt them there.
He's an ambassador. I mean, Nebraska can do what they want with staff size fellas, and Ed Foley's a guy that needs to stay around Nebraska and continue those relationships.
So Ed did a great job going around the state. Now, when it came to it's time to recruit that particular player, Ed was not heavily involved. But he was great in introducing Nebraska football to places where they hadn't had a Nebraska coach in a while. So full credit to him. I just think there are two guys on that staff that have been good to Matt Rhule and have been with Matt Rhule, and Rhule's not going to throw them under the bus, and Rhule's going to take care of them, even if they have struggled at their current job. That's Marcus Satterfield and Ed Foley.
Well, and
period. I mean,
The unfortunate thing is, because of the 105 and the disappearance of walk-on programs, not just at Nebraska but around the country, look, Nebraska's got to put its emphasis where the 3, 4, 5s are, and those are in Omaha. And if you have a Carter Nelson in Ainsworth who's high on recruiting list, then you go get him. But the unfortunate thing in this era of college football is to go out and corral 40 kids to walk on to the Nebraska football program. You can't do that anymore. As much as we love the charm of that, but to say we're going to go out and recruit and hit every high school and take a chance on, a 2 or a 1-star kid or somebody nobody's ever heard about and bring him in from Hershey, like Shane Swanson or something, it's just not going to happen anymore. Your roots have to be in Omaha. They've got to be in Lincoln. And if you find the diamond, then everybody's going to go en masse, like Rhule did to Ainsworth, and buy every Parker that you possibly can to get him to come here. There's no room, unfortunately, for 40 kids to walk on every year.
Well, you're going to go say, let's stay in contact, let's follow your progress, and those would-be walk-ons will end up going somewhere else. And then if they want to play up a level, you get them a couple of years later.
Wasn't it, technically they're not a walk-on because there is 105 scholarships. So everybody that is on the 105 is a scholarship person. So there's technically no walk-ons. I did find it interesting, and I think this is Rhule understanding Nebraska football and the importance of giving somebody a shot. Didn't you guys find it interesting when he broke down the last 10, how he described like the last 10 on the roster? Aren't those essentially walk-ons? But in this case, they get a full scholarship.
Yeah, but you're not bringing in 30 a year.
Yeah,
You've got those 10 Nebraska culture guys, and let's face it, Roman Mancini is now on the target. He's the guy. He's the leader of the Nebraska football program. He loves him some Roman Mangini, that's for sure.
Well, you got to have dudes like that may not be the biggest, fastest, or strongest, but they're going to bring it for you in practice and push some buttons, right? I mean, that's going to spur on maybe your all-world quarterback or your all-world wideout that came in from the portal, or possibly push an offensive or defensive lineman that may need to turn the intensity dial up to a minimum of 8 versus showing up with a 4. So it makes sense, but I'm glad that there's 10 spots for the culture guys. I mean, it's super important.
105 is the best thing that happened to Matt Rhule. You can say it sucks because there's 50 guys that lost technically their jobs, but their culture will be better at 105, and it will force them to be better evaluators and developers because you can't hide in the 105. But you have more of a tighter group at 105 for your culture than about 30 guys that are out there that, aren't all bought in. I mean, you got smaller numbers, and you're in it to win it, and you're all together. And I think that is ideal for what Rhule preaches. And what they already have as a pretty well-established culture.
And to add to that, there was a little tidbit from our friend Tim Verghese yesterday when talking about the Husker Junior Day, where there were guys that were impressed. They're taking a tour around campus. They're looking at the facilities, and there's, according to the guys that were on campus yesterday, 90+ Huskers in the weight room and doing field work on their day off in the winter time, because they understand that 105 number is coming, and you got to outwork everybody else. Like that is kind of underscoring your point, Gary, that, hey, it's a day off yesterday. It's a Saturday. You could have been like me and marathon of the extended edition of Lord of the Rings yesterday for 12 hours. Had an awesome day. They're not doing that. They're in the weight room. They're getting that work in because they know every single day is a competition day whenever the 105 cut down is coming.
You should have stuck with the Game of Thrones. You lost a little cred when you dropped Lord of the Rings, but anyway.
long day, 12 at 9:30 in the morning to 9:30 at night. 12 hours. Game of Thrones might be coming soon.
Can I ask a serious question? How many beers did we crush in that 12-hour marathon?
Zero. I crushed a couple of scones. I made some homemade scones for breakfast.
You go back. Look.
Who are you?
Yeah.
Next thing.
Yeah.
For lunch, I made coffee cake.
Hey, Schmidt, get Elijah a job. Okay. He's been 2 days without a job. We got to get him a job.
Wow.
We'll talk, Elijah. Let's get our shout outs. Let's get our shout outs here at 11.
Next time I make scones, you guys aren't getting any, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, you better shout them out before they leave after the scone and Lord of the Rings comment.
Part of the Boulder Peace Treaty, Jeff Snitley was in. Walter, south of Philly, says no school whiffs on portal O-linemen more than Nebraska. Well, hang on, Walter. You might be pleasantly surprised later. Mike in from Cali. Bill Doleman says, good morning, Joes. I love that shout out. Captain says, school is cool. Yes, it is, Captain. Good to have you. Game Dog is in. Anonymous is here. Good to have Anonymous in. Brian checks in. Injuries on the O-line are concerning, along with the inability to sign any notable O-linemen out of the portal. More misses than hits. Game Dog does some math here with the merch and the influx of revenue from the spring game. Good friends, Big Red Junkies, checking in the pod. Gary Sharp has said hello. James is here. Good to have James in. And again, tell your friends about the Average Joe Sports Show on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Please do so.
How about this for
find us on Spotify and iTunes?
Sorry, I thought you were with the plug. How about this for a little thought from Coach Brandon, saying you don't have to evaluate anything anymore. Ohio State's roster was 95% 4- and 5-star recruits.
Well, you got to get the 4- and 5 stars to come and then stay there, right? It's a modern miracle that Ohio State has the receiver room they have year after year after year, and guys stay at least till their junior year and then go off to the first round. That's incredible what Hartline's got going. That's just kind of my 2 cents on it. Chabo 402 says Raiola needs competition, but the competition needs a fair chance to compete, like the style of QB TJ Lateef. And that's kind of echoing some of Sharpie's thoughts in our discussion about the quarterback competition. The real thing is you got an offensive coordinator that does not care who you are, what you are. Here's what I want from you. Here's what you need to do, or I'm going to find somebody who will do it. Then there's that edict moving forward, at least in that position group.
Especially if you're a receiver, you better block. That message should have been received, loud and clear. That was the one edict that I think of the end of the last regular season was, they've noticed that the Nebraska's receivers are not all that physical. So that would be one thing that I would like to watch in the spring. If there was a spring game, would be to see if you do have some people who have some physicality on the outside and that they are blocking downfield. That might be one of the most interesting culture shifts that there is for the team, right?
Hey, another part of this is I wonder, and we all love competition, and competition makes everybody better, and nobody can feel comfortable. Is basically redshirting is done now.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that also do for competition? For that young buck that everybody's like, oh, in the past you would work hard and get your year under your belt, and we'll see you next year. All of a sudden, that young buck comes in. He's like, there ain't no more redshirting. I'm playing today. What does that do to the equation?
That's fair. You mentioned jobs. Dr. Octagon says, let me know if you need to borrow my Altima, make some money street racing.
Is that too soon in Lincoln?
I don't know. Possibly. Steve says, I thought for sure I saw Elijah spinning a free car wash sign at 70th. No, that hurts. The Jesse Pinkman route.
Hey, sign spinning's an art. Let that be known really fast here. So I am not good at that art.
Hey, it is tax season. You could dress up as the Statue of Liberty on the corner. I mean,
wow.
That's what happens when you make the announcement. Everybody knows, and everybody's got an idea.
Yeah, you could have kept it quiet, Elijah.
I could have, but
no, it was a nice moment. Now we just don't know what's next, right? But anyway,
hey, baseball season's right around the corner. I'll be calling them balls and strikes before too long.
Wonderful. We'll dive in a little more. What's your guys' thought here with as we kind of hit quarterbacks? Let's go to Rocco for a moment. And Rocco, the offensive line target. He is not going to Michigan. That's a report from On3. Visits being shut down. So it's Indiana, it's Nebraska, it's Pitt, it's Virginia. Michigan not expecting to land. I had a buddy reach out who's covered Michigan for a lot of years. And his feel says that he thinks Rocco's headed back to Lincoln.
Well, it's interesting. He has left all of his visits without putting his pen to paper, which is usually like in the modern era of the transfer portal. If you leave a place without putting pen to paper, it means you're not going there. But he's left seemingly all of his visits without putting pen to paper. I know Indiana was in his final list, but they just picked up the other Notre Dame transfer offensive lineman. So the questions become, A, does that hurt Rocco's playing time at Indiana? B, how much more NIL resources do they have to work with to be able to go get a guy like Rocco? You look at Virginia, I think Virginia has some steam from some circles as being maybe the place for him. I don't think they would be able to go and outbid Nebraska. No. That's my humble opinion. I think Nebraska will pay what it takes to go get a starting offensive lineman in the portal, which is what he is. He's a starting offensive lineman. So to me, if it's not Nebraska, it's not about money. But it's few and far between the times now in college football where it's not about money.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, no one has any idea what he's going to do. I mean, I still feel good about Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
I know Nebraska was very aggressive. It comes down to, are they going to probably overpay for an interior offensive lineman because they didn't get a tackle and they have money left over? Probably. Am I going to pay a guard more than I would pay a tackle? But it comes down, and Rhule kind of alluded to this yesterday, is you make an offer and who knows if you get the kid or not? It's whatever the kid wants. So you have the end of money is heavily involved, or you have the discussion and the story about Watson Trent when he showed up and he just wanted to talk football.
Mm-hmm. What's my motive?
I mean,
right?
that's the frustrating thing as a coach is, you want guys that love the sport. There are also guys that love the sport, but also like to get paid. So I don't know what's going to happen here. I think Rhule doesn't want to play the dance, the dog and pony show. They make an offer. They show we got a need for you. Don't screw us by bouncing around the country, and playing us against other schools. But if he said yes to Nebraska, I wouldn't be surprised if he said no to Nebraska. You move on. You look at what Nebraska has on the roster and what they have coming in interior offensive line, and you got to go to work. You got to go to work.
Do you guys think that that college football is going the way of the NFL, where if the going rate for a quarterback this year is $2 to $3 million, then next year it's 2.5 to 3.5, and the next year it's 3 to 4, or the escalating price is just like in the pros? Well, Tom Brady got this amount of money, but Deshaun Watson needs to be the highest paid quarterback, and now it needs to be Dak Prescott, and so it just continues to escalate just because that's what the market is in that particular year, and it just continues to climb. So if Rocco is reportedly, allegedly, whatever the qualifier is $1 million for a right guard, is the price tag now 1.25 next year? Well, you paid Rocco last year this, and now it's this. Is college football entering an era where it's just escalating every year, just because that's what the market pays the position, or that's what the player's worth?
I think that it varies. I think if whoever lands Rocco at that price tag and the kid's all conference and all American and stays injury free and elevates whatever offensive line he ends up at, then I think you could see it get more expensive. I think if you have a bunch of schools,
Rocco leaves and Nebraska needs it, goes to the NFL or whatever, and next year Nebraska's got to get a right guard, and it's like, well, you paid Rocco 1 last year, the market's now 1.1 or 1.2.
Or
right? Are we entering an era where now it becomes the escalating salary for a college football player in the transfer era, or is the market going to look? He was $1 million guy. The price tag this year is $600. This is what your value is. We're not going to get into this escalating just because it's the position. We're not into collective bargaining yet. We will be, but that I just wonder if colleges are going to get into baseline pricing now, and the baseline goes higher the next year, right?
It'll increase. But it's going to be a school that does that. You can always ask for the moon, but you have one buyer out there that's going to say yes to you, right? I mean, who's going to come in and outbid Nebraska? I mean, is Virginia willing to come in and say, all right, we're going to pay you left tackle money, even though you're a right guard? And does that trend continue? It's all about if that piece is that missing piece for you to go from good to playoff contention, and it's different per roster. So I don't know. I'm not ready to go. Conventional wisdom says, everything's going to go up in price, but I'm not ready to quite go all in on that yet, because some of the investments could not hit. I mean, you could overpay, and it could be a bad deal for you at quarterback or tackle or whatever.
We were bringing up Ohio State earlier, and again, this is Ohio State, the national champions, but 19 of their 22 guys were homegrown.
Yeah.
So they had to go, they had a couple of spots, and so they went out shopping, and they're Ohio State compared to a Nebraska or an Indiana or a Virginia. But, if you're frustrated about the portal and Nebraska not being able to get who they want, look internally and say, you know what, be better recruiting high school players, retention, development. So you don't have to worry about going out and at the whim of competing with other schools because it comes down to money. You know what? Compete when you have a chance to vet a kid and build a relationship and get them on campus and get them in your program. You know what? And then work to keep them here. And that's what's going to be the best for Nebraska on offense and defensive lines, is those guys that are playing are their own. They went out, they recruited them, they
agree.
spent they spent a lot of energy to get them out of high school. They got them here and they were theirs. And then there are certain places where you go and you pick and you choose of, if you're going into the portal, when you're going into the portal with a suitcase full of cash, you're grabbing a starter, not a guy that, he could be a starter, but man, he could also, develop, get your guys on campus, develop them. And then that 1 or 2 or 3 needs you need in the portal, just go and get that guy. So you're not every year bringing in 15. And maybe that'll turn the corner now that they kind of replenish the roster and the roster has shrunk. But that would be my that'd be my preference.
And if you can do it that way, it no longer matters if Nebraska is overpaying for a guard. And overpaying is quote unquote to me. Like, I don't care if you overpay for a guard. I don't care if you're paying your guard more than your tackle. I don't care if you had to panic because you got to February and you still needed a guard. It's not my money, first off. Yeah. Second off,
locker room might care.
But can you go out and produce? Can you get the best 11 on offense and on defense? The number does not matter to me. You know what? It's modern college football. A lot of money is flying around. Nebraska's got a lot of money to spend. If you think they're quote unquote overpaying for a guard, what does it matter? What does it matter if they're overpaying for a guard? I care if they fill a position of need. It's the reality you're in right now where you haven't developed what you need from the high school ranks, but you need to field the team next year that gets 9 wins. It's as simple as that to me.
Somehow, some way, homegrown or store-bought, get to 9.
Mic drop?
I do want to echo what Schmidt kind of said earlier, though, as we get back to the heart of this conversation with Spindler. I think it's going to be Nebraska. I'm reading tea leaves here. I think it's going to be Nebraska just because I don't think Virginia is going to offer what Nebraska can offer. And if it's not Nebraska, it's not about money. But I'm kind of repeating myself from earlier here. Is Nebraska overpaying for him? Yeah, maybe. I think he also have the need. I think it's going to be good news for Nebraska this afternoon.
Well, and the other part of it, too, if you're Rocco here, let's talk about your decision-making process. You're leaving a spot where you performed well for 13 games. You're not sure that you're going to keep your job because the guy that you replaced is better than you, or they may have better options or other options. You can go get paid now because you've been a starter on a team that played the national championship. And you're looking at paycheck, you're looking at playing time, you're also looking at on-field performance. And that's the other part of this equation where Nebraska needs to get in the conversation. I mean, Virginia and Nebraska, I mean, these are 2 non-playoff teams, right? One's in a league that's way more winnable in the ACC compared to the Big Ten. The other part of this too is, Indiana and Michigan were 2 other schools you're looking at that have been in the playoff. One's 2 years removed from a national championship, and Michigan was a consideration out of high school for you. So when it comes down to it, what's most important to you? Is it the zeros? Is it the playing time? Is it the team you're going to and a chance to win?
Well, through all this conversation, because there's a little breaking news here. It's not Rocco. Nebraska football needs to start winning. Mm-hmm. They've got a lot of things that they are set up. Like if they can do the most important thing, and that is perform on the field, they've got a lot of things at their disposal that can help them move faster, but they need some substance. They need some wins. And I'll give you an example. We've talked about his name before, Jackson Cantwell. He's the 5-star offensive tackle who's got a connection to Nebraska. And Nebraska's worked heavily to recruit him. And remember, wasn't he this year playing high school football, and he's the offensive tackle, and he was wearing like Nebraska gloves while he was playing. Yep. Yeah, he just announced his final 6. Okay. Oregon, Michigan, Georgia, Missouri, Ohio State, Miami.
Ooh. He has family from Nebraska, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. His mom is one of the greatest track and field athletes in the state of Nebraska, Terry Steer. And his dad was also on the track team at Nebraska.
So you've got 2 alum, and Nebraska didn't make that top 6.
Yeah. I mean, his parents are Olympians. Mm-hmm. His dad, Christian, and then his mom. I knew her as Terry Steer. She's from Crete and then came to Nebraska, and they were shot putters. So, but look at, Oregon, Michigan, Georgia, Missouri has won. Ohio State won a national championship. Miami's in a good spot. Nebraska can have all the money in the world. They can have this beautiful facility. They can have 90,000 people. They can have a, history. But you got to start winning. Got to start winning. And you know what? There's the other thing about the offensive line. And Nebraska's in a spot where Donnie's in his 4th year. And a lot of those young offensive linemen that they recruited because they got here and that room was empty. I mean, they had to go all in the first couple of years on offensive line recruiting. They not only need to win, but in particular at that position, they need to start churning some NFL guys.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we don't know what's going to happen. You watch this weekend, you watch Nash in the Shrine Bowl, and then you had Ty Fedoni and Tommy Hill in the Senior Bowl. And Tommy Hill aside, Nebraska needs like 3 or 4 guys to get drafted this year. And I don't care if they're in the 3rd day or not. They just need to start getting multiple guys drafted.
No, that would help showcase, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just that's why 25 is such a huge year, guys. There's so much riding on, like, making the jump, and then you look at, where they keep teasing and maybe pushing it back, but eventually they're going to have to knock on our door and go, hey, we need some cash for the stadium.
Mm-hmm.
We need to do something with the stadium sooner than later. We're going to need some money. And, oh, by the way, we need $1 million for that offensive tackle. But you're more willing to go, okay, let me go back to my mattress. I'll be right back, Troy. Can you stay right here? Do you want some cookies? Do you want some tea? Why don't you come in off the porch?
Would you like to sit down, sir?
If they're winning and they're playing football in December where you're like, man, I didn't know they could winterize Memorial Stadium. This is pretty friggin' cool. You're more likely to go back to that couch and go under it, crawl under it, and grab that bag of cash and go, here you go, Troy, GBR, Husker for life.
As disappointed as Nebraska fans will be on the Cantwell news, you still got another year to play.
Yep.
Can always change his mind. He probably has 5 dates to prom. My guess is he wants to stay at Missouri. That's just my feeling all along, because they have treated him like a king since he's been a freshman in high school. So I wouldn't doubt if he stayed home and became the foundational piece for whatever that they think that they can do at Missouri, and that's all well and good. But who knows? Maybe Nebraska goes on a roll and he ends up getting Big Red fever again. I think it is interesting, though, to go back and look over the last couple of years. And, Nebraska was supposedly in the mix for the dude who went to Texas. And then was it David Sanders, the South Carolina guy who ends up at Tennessee. So they seem to be in the conversation for the big 5-star recruit along the offensive line each of the last, couple of years, and they haven't landed him. And based on what you said, it looks like they may strike out again, which would be disappointing, especially given his ties to Nebraska. But that'd be like 0 for 3, essentially, having your name in the conversation and then you're not in there on a big offensive line. Well, but I'm with you, going back to what you said earlier, Gary. You brought him in, develop them, make them great while they're here. I think some of those young players in Nebraska's offensive line room are Sledge. I don't know what Knutsen's future is, but Bricks and Gatula. And I think that there's some players that, if they develop them, what they said, this is a developmental program, then go make your own 5 stars out of 3 and 4s.
Yeah, that's
what I want to see.
Bricks is so. I'm gonna throw a quick one in here. It's kind of a little frustrating with Cantwell, but not even to get like on the final 6. But Nebraska also is on the heels of losing, quote unquote, the offensive line equivalent of Nash in South Dakota and Hudson Parliament, which is a fantastic offensive line name. Rocco and then Hudson Parliament. Hudson Parliament is going to Iowa. That's a miss. He's in Sioux Falls. Nebraska needs to, if they've done well with South Dakota kids. That's a miss up there. And I'm thinking, I can't. But back to what they have. Okay, so we'll stop worrying about the misses. What they have. Isn't Bricks like the poster child? Like Nebraska won a battle with him. And Nebraska stayed with him. They took the truck They took the truck to Logan, Iowa. Like Bricks is the poster child of get him here, win a battle, take him from another state that is known for offensive line, whether Iowa backed off or not, who cares? Nebraska got him. He's the poster child for you got him here. He was highly thought of coming out of high school. Let's make him an all Big Ten lineman and eventually an NFL guy.
He's your example.
A multi-year starter, and Grant Bricks recruits the next Grant Bricks. And see, you need that to start. Like Nebraska hasn't been able to recruit the next Cam Jurgens. You know?
No, that's reality. Show what you can do. Show your work, right?
Well, I will say, finding the next Cam Jurgens it's got to be hard to go find the tight end that wants to catch passes somewhere and be like, bud, guess what? You're a sinner.
Remember,
position, we got you.
Remember the first year that he was at center? It was disastrous. He could not snap in the shotgun.
Oh, yeah.
And people were like, oh, my gosh, get the guy back to tight end. He's never going to be a center. And they developed him.
So part of that that's a great point, Elijah, and what you just said, Bill, because you remember, so I got onto Cam when he was a sophomore at Beatrice. Remember, he was a tight end, but he was also an outside linebacker. And there were schools that were recruiting him as an outside linebacker. And I went, I don't know. He came to Nebraska and good on Frost and Austin at the time, because they were like, I don't know if you're going to be a tight end because you're going to grow. Your body has got a lot of room to put weight on. Remember, they slid him initially to tackle. Mm-hmm. And then they had a need. And then they basically said, you know what? You're going to play in the NFL as a center. That short list of things that you went, man, Scott, you were absolutely right. You have to give him credit for going, we're going to sell Jurgens on making the move to center, because I don't know that he was all in at the beginning. But now look he's going to the Super Bowl. He's a starting center in the NFL. He's one of the better offensive line on a great offensive line. It's identifying athletes and putting them in the right spot. Like that's what, look at Grant Nelson, or Carter Nelson, how they look at him and go, okay, where will he be best utilized? Because he's an athlete. That's part of the evaluation and then turning it into development.
Well,
it is kind of,
go ahead.
Sorry, I would say it is kind of fun to look up pictures of Cam Jurgens whenever he showed up on campus at Nebraska, and then pictures of him when he left campus on Nebraska. Because I know a lot of people that also had similar trajectories like that. They didn't put on 60 pounds of muscle. They put on 60 pounds in other ways, but it's kind of fun to see. Like, he looks like he enjoyed the college experience with just how the body looks different, you know?
The evaluation and projecting part, man, that is such an inexact science. Can you put on X amount of weight? Can their body take it? Can they transition to that new skill they've got to learn? And then can they go be great at it from a physical standpoint, but also from a confidence standpoint? There's so many different steps in the Cam Jurgens success story, which is really, really cool. But yeah, the here and now is continuing to feed and water your homegrown talent and put examples out there on Saturday that turn into examples on Sunday, right? And Nebraska needs to do more of that, and along the way, win some ball games. That's what they're shooting for. Fellas, as we wind it down, it's the Average Joe Sports Show. Sunday live, we aren't going to lead you into a Nebraska basketball game because they tip off later. It's old Dana time. Oregon, Nebraska. We'll get there in a moment. -6.5. I've been given a stop sign, Elijah.
Elijah wants a 30-second timeout.
No, because first I need to take my victory lap for correctly predicting Heinrich Herberg to win the dunk contest on Thursday night. Yes, thank you.
How'd you do with the old steak in the beer bet, though?
That was on a different show. I don't quite remember.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
On this show, though, I predicted Heinrich Herberg would be winning the dunk contest. He did win the dunk contest. Thank you very much. I know ball. All right, back to you, Schmidt.
Quick thing about Heinrich. He hasn't missed a day in the weight room.
No.
Is he 240, 250?
Yeah, I'd say 241.
He looks to me like since the bowl game, he's already put on, he looks like he's put on 15 pounds since the bowl game already.
Yeah.
But good 15 pounds.
Yeah, he ain't playing quarterback anymore.
No, He is not, but inside the red zone, snap it to him anyway. Let him go kill somebody to get to the goal line.
One thing about him, though, real quick, he's like the ultimate Robin in this state right now, because he and it looks like he and Dylan Raiola have become besties, because he had Dylan out there as his prop assist guy during the slam dunk contest, and then I was at the Supernovas game on Friday, and he's there with Dylan and Harper Murray, and there's Heinrich next to Harper, who got the largest ovation of the night when Matt Rhule's there on his 50th birthday. Nice applause. Bud Crawford shows up, and look, I don't fanboy on too many people other than AJ Foyt and Bud Crawford, but I mean, that was amazing. But they introduced Harper Murray, and then she gets this incredible ovation at CHI, and there's her Robin, Heinrich Harburg, right next to both of them. I mean, the guy knows how to be around the spotlight. He's just not quite in the spotlight right now, but good on him for accepting, being the sidekick.
Hey, there you had two of the most recognizable people in the state of Nebraska next to each other, Harper Murray and Dylan Raiola.
Yeah. 3 seats down from Bud Crawford.
Then there's Bill Doleman. I love
it. Doleman was up in 223. He was like,
hey. Doleman was courtside with the headset on.
Bud.
This story came out a couple weeks ago, but as we kind of see Heinrich Harburg's career trajectory, this story's out a couple weeks ago that one of the reasons why Riley Leonard didn't come to Nebraska is that he was on campus on his own dime for a recruiting visit back in the day on the same weekend that Heinrich Harburg committed to Nebraska. And he went, oh, they just picked up an in-state quarterback. I guess I'll go find something else to go do. And now you see goes off to Duke, goes off to Notre Dame, runner-up in a national title game. Like, incredible career. I don't even care. Like,
neither one of them will win a national title, so who cares?
Yeah, Heinrich Harburg, he's been great. I think he's going to be a good addition at tight end. And Nebraska got their quarterback of the future, Dylan Raiola. It's funny how it all works out for everybody.
I have visions of option routes being wore out on 3rd and medium this fall. That's just me. So are we taking the points? Are you taking Oregon? How we handicapping this Nebraska tip-off here later against the Fighting Altmans?
Well, the fact that we are 57 minutes into the show before we finally mentioned Husker basketball, and like we started to mention Husker basketball, we went, wait, let's talk some more football first. Now back to basketball. We're still not ready to be back in on this Husker basketball team. It's still a road game against a very, very good team. Give me Oregon in the points.
Okay.
I'm hoping for a split on the trip to the Pacific Northwest. The one thing to keep in mind, though, so Oregon got blasted by UCLA. Oregon's a tough team to figure out. They're playing at home, but it's 4:30 in Eugene. So that's kind of an odd time. They don't draw very well, which is disappointing for Dana because that's a program that deserves support. I don't know. I think Nebraska is day to day. They survived the other night. I mean, if Will Riley hits that shot, our whole thing is like, season's over. Baseball starts in a couple of weeks, man. I hope Jordy Ball doesn't get injured the opening weekend. So I don't know what to expect today, on the road. Because Nebraska just they are who they are. They have their limitations. They have such a small margin for error. They got to play defense so well, and it's a make or miss sport. If Illinois doesn't hit threes, Nebraska gets beaten that game. But they were 10 of 42. So I think Nebraska will employ the same strategy and try and muck it up and try and keep it close. But I don't know. I don't like Nebraska today. But they've got to get to keep the remote hopes alive. They got to get a split out of this.
Look, both of these coaches have deep Nebraska ties, and I think that makes it a special matchup. But when you have somebody on a bench that cut his teeth by coaching in the greater Fairbury metropolitan area with the Southeast Community College Blue Bombers,
wow,
I think it's hard to bet against Dana Altman and the Ducks. Mitch Richmond is not coming through the tunnel in the K-State Wildcats when he was there, but I think Oregon at home protects its home floor, and Nebraska does get the split in the Pacific Northwest. But we can talk about SEC Blue Bomber basketball in Fairbury, on another episode of the Average Joe Sports Show. But it is worth noting.
Bill, what would you have been like? Because there was twice in Dana's career that one, he was mentioned heavily for the job at Nebraska, and the other one, he wanted the job. Like before Collier got hired, and then when Moose was here. Everybody's trying to attach Dana Altman to Moose. Can you imagine Dana Altman at Nebraska? Probably still be here, right? If you made the move from Nee to Altman, because Dana was at Creighton at the time and really had a strong interest in this job to be closer to family or to be at Nebraska.
Well, and his wife's from Stanton, and I mean, check days in Wilbur would have taken on a whole new tenor if Dana Altman had become Nebraska's head basketball coach.
Which he still which every year Dana Altman with his brother and his dad, I believe, they go to check Wilbur days.
Yeah.
Which I highly recommend to everybody out there. It is a treat.
Milk.
You can fly into Fairbury International.
2-gallon milk containers of beer. It is glorious.
and Elijah could learn how to make kolaches. But if you fly into Fairbury International, there's probably a shuttle that will get you to Wilbur, and you can enjoy one of the great festivals in Nebraska. Dana Altman would have been an unbelievable coach at Nebraska. And yeah, if he had gotten it when Barry Collier did, and not Bill Self, he'd still be here.
One thing I do want to say with this game tonight, to get back to the business at hand, is Oregon's been scuffling just a little bit recently. The question is more, though, in my eyes, with Nebraska, can they stack good performances? You had a get-right, feel-good game against Illinois. Do you let down, or do you continue to stack and build? I mean, Oregon just got killed by UCLA.
They've been killed a few times at home.
They lost on the road against Minnesota. They've struggled on the road, generally speaking. They snuck past Washington, snuck past Penn State, snuck past Ohio State. Like, they've been sneaking past some not great basketball teams, and they've had some rough performances as of late. Nebraska can stack performances. They have a chance, but we know how they do, generally speaking, on the road. And I think Oregon's going to be motivated here in a spot like this where they've been kind of scuffling just a little bit.
Nothing that happens today in Oregon will surprise anybody. Right?
I'll take Nebraska.
Oregon can win by 20, but given Nebraska's 50-year history or 100-year history, it would not shock anybody if Nebraska won by 20. Nothing with this program surprises ever anymore.
Now here's one thing. So I didn't like all of a sudden go, oh my God, Nebraska's back after Thursday night. I'm like, oh, they survived. Hoiberg the last couple of years has been pretty good coach record-wise in February and March. But they need at least a split at Oregon and at Washington, because then they come home a week from today to take on Ohio State.
We'll know the first 3 minutes with how many three-point attempts are being taken by a certain guy versus driving to the rim.
Hey, he didn't. You know what? He didn't do that. He played 41 minutes, and and Bryce is like he mimics Nebraska's current stretch where he's good, then he gets on the milk carton, and then they throw the milk away, and then you get the milk back, and you like drink it, and you're like, oh, and they're like, no, I want different milk, and then you drink it again, and you're like, ooh, that tastes really, really good. I mean, it's just it's what Nebraska basketball is, but they're still, they're still kind of hanging around. I mean, they're next four, last four, first four out. They're like living on that lane, but they need at least a split out there. Washington got to win at Minnesota. I know Minnesota's terrible, but Nebraska's road record isn't great, and it's a new environment. Long travel. They're the opposite of Mick Cronin. Who knows what happens today? They could pull an upset, but I think Oregon, coming off just an absolute beatdown against UCLA, will have something for Nebraska.
Yep.
Does it linger, or do they take it out on somebody? That is Gary Sharp, Bill Doleman, Elijah Herbel, Chris Schmidt, the Average Joe Sports Show Live. Love doing this Sundays. Tell a buddy. Subscribe to the Average Joe Sports Show on YouTube, where you can find us. And also Spotify, iTunes, subscribe to the podcast, take us with, and find us also on Twitter, the AJ Sports Pod. Fellas, have a great rest of your weekend. We'll be back this week for a midweek hit and see if there's any other news we can get to after just a crazy week. We appreciate you checking us out, and we'll talk to you down the road with the Average Joe Sports Show.